Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
What's going on? Welcome to the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you've had a nice week. It's Thursday. Doesn't feel like Thursday. I don't know why. I don't really know what day it feels like, to be honest with you. I've had something every night this week, so this week is just snapped by in a blink. Absolutely flying. We got more college basketball coming up this weekend. Pacers play tonight, but I want to start with the Indianapolis Colts. And I have some bad news about the Indianapolis Colts, and I'll discuss all this with Destin Adams coming up here in about 20 minutes or so when he joins the show. The Colts aren't getting Tyler Warren. Every mock draft that I've checked, that's been updated since the Combine, has Tyler Warren going top 10. So with him more than likely not being on the board when the Colts are selecting whoever they select with the 14th pick, who do they take? That's what I wanted to know. And I've come to this conclusion. No one really knows. Usually when you read a mock draft, there's a consistent name that pops up. If there's not a consistent name, then there's a consistent position that continues to pop up. That was the case early. Everyone thought that the Colts were going to draft Tyler Warren at 14. And then everyone was like, oh, wait, Tyler Warren's really good at a position that people really like to have, tight end. So now we probably won't be there at 14. And unless the Colts are going to trade up for him, which, let's be honest, you and I both know that in this, Chris Ballard world that we live in, he's not trading up for anybody. So he's not going to be there. Okay? Like, he will not be there at 14, and the Colts will not trade up to draft Tyler Warren. Okay? So the Colts are going to have to take somebody else, and no one knows who. I've looked at 6 different mock drafts. All 6 had a different guy taken by the Colts at 14. Okay, here's what I saw for these positions and players in these 6 different mock drafts that I looked at. Tight end, Colston Loveland, tight end out of Michigan that people seem pretty fond of. Safety, Malachi Starks, safety out of Georgia. Big fan of him. That dude can really play. Safety, Nick Emanwari, safety out of South Carolina, a guy that was projected originally to be like a second-round pick, but then he showed up at the Combine and tested like elite in every single category. He has like elite weight, elite height, elite speed, just elite everything. Elite vertical, elite broad jump. Like, if you lined him and Anthony Richardson up, you'd be like, geez, like, these could be the 2 best athletes in the NFL. Okay, so Nick Emanwari really jumped up. Someone has the Colts taking him at 14. Offensive tackle, Armand Mabo out of Missouri. He's a guy that I've seen mocked to the Colts at 14. Offensive guard, which I know we're all very excited about our offensive guards here in the great city of Indianapolis. Offensive guard, Tyler Booker. He's been mocked to the Colts with the 14th pick. And cornerback, Jahdae Barron, winner of the Jim Thorpe Award for best defensive back in college football this last year out of Texas. He has also been mocked to the Colts at 14. Once again, no one has any idea who the Colts are taking. There's not a consensus opinion on even position. 6 different websites, 6 different mock drafts, 5 different positions offered up for the Indianapolis Colts, which tells me that they need help at tight end and safety and offensive tackle and offensive guard and cornerback. Okay, and that also doesn't include the issues that they have at linebacker. Like, if you want to just figure out how bad or how average this Colts roster is, because I don't think that it's bad. I think it's more below average to average. Then just look at all these mock drafts. People are like, geez, like, they have like holes in all these different places. And once again, that doesn't include the issues that they have at linebacker. I'm expecting them to take a linebacker within their first 100 picks of this NFL draft, which is less than 50 days away. This Colts roster needs a ton of help. Okay? That's why no one knows what position or what player they're going to draft with the 14th pick. They got holes everywhere. And to make matters a little bit tougher, they have 18 unrestricted free agents heading into free agency, which starts this next week. Here are some of them, not all of them. Here are the ones that here are the names that I think that most Colts fans and you would recognize. Will Fries, offensive guard. Ryan Kelly, guy who's been here for, over a decade, the last of the Grigson era. Okay, Sam Ellinger. I know there's still some Sam Ellinger hopefuls out there. If you are, get off that train. Get off that ship. It's sinking pretty quickly. Joe Flacco, he's not coming back, though. Trey Sermon, probably not going to bring him back. Ashton Doolin, Mo Alley Cox. Please don't bring Mo Alley Cox back. Kylan Granson, don't need to see him back either. Danny Pinter, Taven Bryan, Dio Dangbo, a guy who, I was reading some articles yesterday. Some people are projecting for Dio Dangbo to reel in somewhere around $20 million a year in free agency. EJ Speed, I'm just going to leave that Dio clip right there for you. You can react however you want to. Someone's going to pay that guy $20 million a year. That is what his projection is. EJ Speed, Grant Stewart, he had that little flash in the pan moment where he had like 20 tackles in a game earlier this season, and Julian Blackmon. Now it's Chris Ballard. If they bring back more than like 3 or 4 of those players, I'm going to be a little annoyed because that's probably all that they should bring back. Like they should bring back Will Fries. They should bring back. I would like it if they brought back Ryan Kelly. I know that I'm going to get some pushback on that, but that's a guy who's been around. That's the guy who talked to Anthony Richardson after he, stepped out or tapped out for that play. I think he's a real legitimate leader. I think he's tough. I know that he's not great anymore, but let him be the backup center and just let him be like a voice in that locker room. I would bring back Dio Dangbo. I know people are going to be like, why would you bring back Dio Dangbo? I don't know, because it's nice to have depth along the defensive line. Okay, would I bring him back for $20 million a year? Absolutely not. But like some depth there wouldn't be a bad thing. He led the Colts in quarterback hits this year, okay, with 17, and this is in limited snaps. Okay, so like I would bring him back. I'd bring back Will Fries. I'd bring back Ryan Kelly. And that'd probably be it. I'd bring back and Grant Stewart because special teams are important. Okay, so those are the guys that I personally would bring back, right? But the reason why I bring all this up, I want to prepare you for something. Chris Ballard is going to sign free agents this year. Okay, and when he does, you're going to read think pieces about how he's changed and how he's learned from his mistakes and how free agency is now a point of emphasis for the Indianapolis Colts. And that's just not true. Whether Chris Ballard had talked, before the free agency had started, about competition and all that stuff, he was going to bring in free agents simply out of necessity this offseason. Like he's going to lose like 12 or 13 guys at a minimum from his roster last year. And he has to replace them with someone. Maybe I'm giving Chris Ballard a little bit too much credit here, but I don't think he's dipping into last year's practice squad, and I don't think he's going to load up on undrafted free agents to try and fill all of these different slots. Okay? Like whether he was on the hot seat or not coming into this offseason, he was going to have to go into free agency because they don't have 18 draft picks this year. They have 7. Okay, and you got to fill those other 11 spots somewhere, or you got to go somewhere to find guys to fill in those cracks. Okay, and they're going to have to fill those spots, whether Chris Ballard had talked about competition or not. So my standard for Chris Ballard now in free agency isn't just for him to bring some guys in, like bring in some like starting caliber free agents, because there are going to be some guys out there like that. Like I'm not going to be moved because he brought in some guy to be the 3rd string edge rusher. Okay, I'm not going to be moved by that. I think we're going to see the same thing with free agents that we're seeing with this quarterback competition. Chris Ballard made a pretty large fuss about bringing in competition. Oh, we need competition. We need it. We need more competition in the building. We need guys that push each other. Iron sharpens iron, which is, a true statement. It's in Proverbs. Anyway. But, like when these guys say it, it's kind of cliche, right? So, like they're bringing in guys, they're going to talk about competition, but I don't think that the Colts need competition. I think that they need starting caliber players, And I also love it how, like, competition wasn't a thing until DeForest Buckner said, we need more competition. But I don't think we're going to get that. Just like I don't think we're going to get that with Anthony Richardson. Like they're defining competition with Anthony Richardson with players like Daniel Jones, which once again, we're going to talk about all this with Destin Adams of A to Z Sports coming up here in about 10 minutes. Okay. And I think that they're going to do that at every single position. They're going to bring in these like lower level starters at best. And they're like, yeah, that's competition. And we're going to look at, this next year's roster and last year's, and we're going to be like, oh, it's like the exact same guys. That's what it's going to be. Like they're going to bring in these low-level starters or high-level backups as quote-unquote competition for all of these guys on this Colts roster. And we are once again, with Chris Ballard, in a very similar situation. Okay? It's going to be all about the draft. Can Chris Ballard put together a good draft class? He's had like one or two where you look back and you're like, yeah, it was pretty good. He brings in Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr., and I believe that was the Quentin Nelson draft class as well. Like he brings that one in. It's like, oh, like, yeah, this guy's pretty good at drafting. And then, the Colts were kind of good there for a few years. They just didn't have the right quarterback in place. The one year they have Phillip Rivers, they go to the playoffs and all that stuff. Okay. Chris Ballard needs to have a draft like that this year because, as we all know, like we see right through the BS that Chris Ballard's pushing of, this guy isn't going to bring in real competition. He's going to bring in these like high level backups. And like, look, if you're bringing in high level backups, the key word there is backup. Sure, they're high level. That's great. Depth. Love depth. Okay, that's part of why I do think that they should bring Dio Adangbo back. And I say that, and I'm sure that some people are like, why would you bring him back? Bah, here are numbers, blah, 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 blah. I don't know. When you're splitting snaps with guys, like your numbers just aren't going to be as good. It's just a simple reality of it. Like if you took Trey Hendrickson, who led the NFL in sacks once again last year, if you cut the number of snaps that he played in half, he probably wouldn't lead the NFL in sacks. That's just a pretty simple reality of it. So if the Colts are going to make leaps, if they're going to become like a legitimate playoff team this next season, like it's not going to be through free agency. If they're going to better their roster, it's going to have to be in the NFL draft because, Chris Ballard can stand at the podium and he can talk about competition and he can talk about how inspiring and how much he admired, the great DeForest Buckner for talking about the importance of competition. Doesn't matter. 9 years, Chris Ballard. That's a long. You're going into year 9. You're not fooling anybody, man. You're going to bring in these high level backups and call it competition, which is problematic because if it really is competition, then this roster isn't very good. Which I think is also pointed out by all the different projections that we've seen from these different mock drafts. And there's a player that was released yesterday. And if Chris Ballard wants to get me on his side, he'll bring this guy in. 29-year-old Joey Bosa was cut by the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, he's not as good as he was because he's 29. Okay, like he's not going to be all pro anymore. Probably not even going to make a Pro Bowl. But that is a guy who's got some pedigree who you can bring in, and at a minimum, you can use him as a rotational rusher, right? But that's a guy that has a name and has production and is still a pretty good player. Once again, not great anymore. But that's a guy who can start on any team in the league, except for maybe Philadelphia, because Philadelphia is freaking loaded. Okay? They are the exception, not the rule. Go get Joey Bosa. Go bring in a guy who can actually play and is an actual like starting caliber player. Like create like legitimate competition for, Leatu Latu and Ibukam, who's, gonna come, or Abukum, excuse me, who's gonna come back this year after tearing his Achilles this last year. Okay? Like that is legitimate competition, and because of the position that he plays, even if he's not a starter, he's still going to be able to rotate in and have a pretty nice impact. Okay? We're going to run that idea by Destin Adams coming up here in about 5 minutes. We're also going to talk about the Colts and this quote unquote quarterback competition that I'm still not convinced is a real competition. We'll have to wait and see. Destin Adams of A to Z Sports, he's the Colts beat writer, also covers the draft for them. He's set to join the show coming up here in about 4 minutes.
Texting enrolls you in a recurring automated marketing text messages. Consent not required to purchase. Message and data rates may apply.
The team's looking good this season.
I think so. Man, I miss playing football. Being young with unlimited energy.
Unadulterated sports talk with unfiltered takes. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? Welcome back to the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Tickets. Got the man Destin Adams on the line just in time. Destin Adams covering the Colts for A to Z Sports, also an NFL draft analyst. Destin, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm going good. This is the last week of quiet until the NFL season essentially starts back up again with free agency. So just enjoying the quiet.
Are there any? I mean, yes, the quiet is nice because like you said, like just given how many unrestricted free agents the Colts have, like I think everyone's kind of expecting them to be a little bit more active than normal in free agency. Is there any specific free agent that you're like, I want that guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's multiple that make a lot of sense. I think me personally, I'm looking at the secondary. I think there's a lot of good corners. I think there's a lot of good safeties that will just make sense if the Colts decide that that's where they want to go. I mean, the big fish for this free agency cycle in the secondary is obviously Javon Holland, the safety from Miami. Really versatile player who has the ability to play either safety spot and has that ability to kind of be a little bit of a hybrid type role, which Lou Anarumo has really succeeded with in the past. I think my number one overall player personally in terms of Colts fit, though, is Charvarius Ward, corner from San Francisco. I think his man ability would be a perfect fit. I think the veteran leadership that he would bring coming from a defense that had a lot of success in the NFL, obviously has a past working relationship with Samuel Womack, who's on the Colts this past year. So I think Charvarius Ward would be somebody that would definitely elevate this defense and help them make some other moves this offseason.
This is a pretty deep corner draft. There's a couple safeties that'll probably go, in the first and second round as well. How do you think the depth at corner is going to impact what the Colts do in the offseason in terms of free agency?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. I'm still a person that wishes the draft was before free agency because I wish you could go through the process and figure out what that draft haul you're going to have through those 7 rounds is, and then use free agency to kind of fill in holes afterwards. I'm not a fan that it's the other way around, and I know that I'm sometimes in the minority on that thinking, but I don't think the corner group in this draft class is going to prevent the Colts from looking into free agency this time around. I think, and some people can say I'm just being optimistic, but I think Ballard and his comments and his unprompted comments on the topic of free agency and making sure that he is better at finishing deals, quote unquote. To me, that tells me they have a plan to attack, especially the secondary, with the defensive shift that they just made.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Joined by Destin Adams of A to Z Sports, where he covers the Colts and the NFL draft. So I think the big thing in free agency, though, that people are really intrigued by is what are the Colts going to do with the whole quarterback competition thing? So are there which quarterbacks that are going to be available this offseason would you define as competition for Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I don't know if everyone else is like me, but whenever I hear quarterback competition for this offseason, I kind of roll my eyes just because you can say that, and I understand that they very well might want there to be a quarterback competition to push Anthony. But there's nobody realistic on the market that's going to come in here and you're like, man, this is a 50-50 coin flip on who's going to win the competition realistically. I mean, they're not going to go get a Sam Darnold. They're not going to be the team that goes out and pays him $30 million plus to quote unquote compete. If you give a guy $30 million, it's his job. And I also think that's the same thing with the Justin Fields, who is projected to get around $20 million. I don't think you hand out a $20 million annual contract and say, yeah, go into camp and compete for a job. So I think you're looking at a little bit more mid to low tier guys. I think my favorite option is Daniel Jones. I mean, former NFL starter, former first-round pick, has had some good moments in the league, led his team to the playoffs and to a really good record even one year. Goes on, gets a very large contract. Obviously, that didn't go well for New York, and that's no longer happening there. But I think because of his success, you could at least pitch that there's a competition going into camp. I still think anyone that's added or signed is starting behind the eight ball in terms of who they want to start here next year. And I guess I'll believe it when I see it if come training camp that they give whoever that is a fair shake at winning that job.
Joined by Destin Adams, Colts beat writer and NFL draft analyst for A to Z Sports. That's kind of how I feel about it. The interesting thing that I think you said there is like quarterback contracts are just really weird. Like, I don't think $20 million a year for Justin Fields, when you compare like that contract compared to like other guys like Baker Mayfield, who I think is at like 35, Joe Burrow is obviously at like 60. He's obviously the top of the market. Like, I think that's, and with the cap going up, like, I'm not sure that like $20 million a year is really a lot for a quarterback. Does that make sense, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think $20 million in the grand scheme of it is a lot at the quarterback position. I think it's a lot for a backup quarterback, though, to where if you went out and signed Justin Fields for that $20 million annually, I don't know if you can truly justify going into camp and competing. Because if he loses that job, then you have $20 million just sitting behind your starter, where he only plays if there's an injury or if something changes down the road. To me, if you give a guy $20 million, I just don't see how you go into camp with at least the expectation that the job is his to lose.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what I think that you said about Anthony Richardson that's really true is like whoever comes in will be starting behind the eight ball. And like I know that you brought up Daniel Jones, but when he feels more like a high level backup than he does like actual competition. Like would you like compared to someone like Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, like where do those guys kind of fall at, I guess, on your scale of like who would actually be competition for Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I mean, I think Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers would definitely be more competition. The problem is you're not going to sell those guys to come in and compete in camp. I mean, you're definitely not getting Aaron Rodgers to agree to compete with a 22-year-old, soon to be 23-year-old quarterback in camp. I don't think he, mentality-wise, would allow himself to do that. Russell Wilson, even at this stage of his career, it feels like he's probably going to get offered opportunities to at least be a bridge starter somewhere for maybe a team that ends up taking a quarterback in the top 3 rounds per se in the 2025 NFL draft. So I just don't know if the Colts are going to be high on their list of options, which is why, like when I said earlier, like I think their options are a lot more limited than people think. And I think Daniel Jones might be the best realistic option, like out there. Maybe you can go after a Jameis, who's had some success, obviously, very up and down at times, but has had some success, very good leader. I think the Daniel Jones, the Jameis Winstons, the Mac Jones, maybe they try a retread, recent bust and see if they can make it work with like a Trey Lance or a Zach Wilson. But I think that's the group or name-wise that makes the most sense in what they could actually be in the market for, because it takes 2 to tango, and I just don't think the Colts are going to be high on a team, on a player like Russell Wilson's free agency options.
Yeah, and the thing about Russell Wilson, why I do think that that's going to be the guy, because like when you read about some of the interactions that Russell Wilson had in Seattle and Denver and Pittsburgh, he's just not very likable. And I think there's a pretty decent chance that the Colts look up and they're like, oh, Russell Wilson kind of works. And Russell Wilson's like, the Colts are the only place where I can go to play. How likely do you think that is, given just the fact that Russell Wilson isn't exactly liked around the league?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's definitely been some pushback in terms of teams in the locker room. I mean, if this offseason, which looks like it's going this way, the Steelers choose Justin Fields, who for all purposes, they benched for Wilson last year. If they go in and do that, I feel like that tells you probably a lot about how the locker room felt about those two quarterbacks. So it's definitely possible. And if he goes out there and his market is just drier than expected, could he be someone that allows himself in terms of pride to go into camp and compete with somebody? Maybe. I still think the teams that will end up drafting a quarterback a little bit higher would look at Wilson as a very good option as a bridge to be able to start for a year, give a guy some time to sit and learn. And Wilson may look at that as a better opportunity to put on some tape to have a future job than coming to the Colts and potentially losing the starting job to a guy like Richardson.
Joined by Destin Adams of A to Z Sports, where he covers the Colts and the NFL draft. I want to go back to Sam Darnold, because while I do think that, Chris Ballard and the rest of the front office and Shane Steichen want for Anthony Richardson to be the starter this next year, like that is the best thing for the Colts is Richardson comes back and he's great, and then everyone's happy for the next 10 years or however long it winds up being. My thing is, just with all of the issues that they've had, not even just with this play, but also with injury, in terms of Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen keeping their jobs, because that is the ultimate goal of every GM and head coach. It's to be employed the following year. Why wouldn't they go spend a little extra, bring in Sam Darnold, a guy that when you look at all of the quarterback options for the Colts, like he's probably the best option in terms of being able to come in and play immediately and be good. Like, why wouldn't they spend the extra money on him?
Yeah, I mean, I think in theory it makes sense because of how you explained it. These guys aren't guaranteed a job for 2026. So would betting on Sam Darnold be a better bet than Anthony Richardson? Probably. I fully understand that. I think the disconnect for me is the Colts are not Sam Darnold away from even winning the AFC South. I don't think the Colts offense is Minnesota's offense in terms of having weapons like a Justin Jefferson, having Jordan Addison. I think the run game is probably better here, which would be a bonus for him. But if you go out and you give, let's say he gets the low end of his expectations and it's only $30 million, the Colts are pretty strapped after that even to go out and improve the secondary. Right now, they don't have a starting free safety on the roster. Right now, their starting cornerbacks would not be very good fits for Lou Anarumo's defense. They definitely need more speed on the outside. Another starting linebacker needs to be acquired this offseason, whether that's the draft or in free agency. Dayo Adengbo is most likely walking out the door. So do you need to add more to the defensive line this offseason? I think when you look across the defense, you just start to realize, man, like there's a lot more needs than maybe people realize. And if you go out and sign Sam Darnold to a $30 million contract, you better hope he is able to hit on the really good part of what we saw last season, because I don't think your defense is going to be good enough to win games unless you're putting up a bunch of points.
Joined by Destin Adams, Colts beat writer and NFL draft analyst for A to Z Sports. I'm with you. Like, the defense has a lot of holes. Like, EJ Speed is he's going to be a free agent as well. Colts probably need a little bit of help at linebacker, like you brought up, Dayo Adengbo. He's leaving, all that kind of stuff. But my thing with Darnold is just like I do think that bringing in Lou Anarumo, I think immediately raises the floor of this defense, even if you lose some talent, just because like I didn't like Gus Bradley. I didn't think he did a very good job. I think they're going to be a little more multiple and all those things. And I do think that when you I mean, you know this, you're smart. Like when you weigh the weight of position of quarterback just outweighs everything else by so much more. Like if you bring in Sam Darnold and he's, maybe not as good as he was last year, because I don't expect him to come in and have another like top 5 statistical season at quarterback like he did last year. But if he's a top 10 guy in terms of just from a number standpoint, then maybe instead of 8-9, you go 10-7 and you make the playoffs. And I feel like that's kind of the benchmark for the Colts this year in terms of Steichen and Ballard sticking around for one more season. You're probably right. They probably won't bring him in. But man, like what do you think the offense would look like? Like how much better would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Sam Darnold was firing on all cylinders during the year, I mean, there were people trying to say, should he be in the MVP conversation? Like, he was playing at a really high level. I think down the stretch, you kind of saw it falter a little bit. And I think that's where some of my concerns would be, just because the Colts offensive line is going to be a question mark. Their receiving core, while they have some promise, is still a pretty big question mark at times. And so I just don't know if Sam Darnold comes in and would be able to do what we saw from him early in the year with Minnesota at a rate high enough for it to, at the end of the year, you look back on giving him $30 million and say, yeah, that was a good investment for our football team. I think Sam Darnold could be a very good starter next year somewhere. I think for him and his team, I think figuring out where the best landing spot is going to be almost as important as that yearly number that's next to that contract. Just because if you go out there and just drop the ball in a sense, and you look a lot like what you looked like down the stretch in that week 18 game and in the playoffs, no matter what that contract is, you're not going to be a starter in 2026. Yeah,
that's a totally fair point. Joined by Destin Adams, Colts beat writer and NFL draft analyst for A to Z Sports. So there, like you clearly have some concern with like the offensive line and the defense and just kind of how the Colts are going to fill all of their holes. Do you think that the Colts have enough on their roster for us to figure out next year whether or not Anthony Richardson is good enough to be a guy going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's concern if they're not able to fill some of these holes, that you're not setting the kid up to give you a fair chance to know that answer. But I also think time has kind of ran out, and where you're entering year 3, if you end next season with more questions than answers yet again, I don't think you can use we didn't have enough for him to show if he's the answer as an excuse anymore. To me, if you don't get closer to an answer after the year and he shows promise and he shows improvement, the Colts have to do what is best for their organization, and that would be moving on from the quarterback and figuring out what's next. I also think if he goes in the next season and just is nowhere near showing improvement, we probably have a new general manager, probably have a new head coach, and if they're coming in, then Richardson's chances of being on a roster where the GM didn't draft him, the head coach did not develop the offense that's around him, probably is going to be out of luck in terms of being the quarterback in Indianapolis.
What do you think? So I think he's probably going to be the starter because, as you mentioned earlier, like whoever comes in, they're probably going to be behind the 8 ball in terms of beating him out for the spot. What do you think he has to do this next year to prove that he can be the guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that he's going to have an off season where he's healthy and he can just work on his game, his footwork, the accuracy concerns, I think that's big for him. This will be the first time in his professional career that he's able to do that, obviously, after he was having to rehab the shoulder injury last year, didn't get to really start throwing until about a month and a half, 2 months before the season. Right now, he's already in Florida. He's already working towards next season. So I think that first aspect is a big one. Obviously, we saw this past year the questions about his process as a pro, his process as a quarterback in the building. I think those things can't even be a question next year. I think he has to come in. I think he has to command the locker room. I think he has to command the meeting rooms and show that this is something he's willing to put 150% of effort into being as good of a quarterback that he can be for the Indianapolis Colts. And on the field, I think seeing that accuracy number come up significantly. Does he need to be a 60% passer to be a good NFL quarterback? I don't think that's necessarily accurate. But can you have a 47% completion percentage and be an effective enough quarterback in the NFL? No.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like the accuracy thing, because, the whole being a leader off the field, I think it's really hard to be 23 years old, which I think is what he'll be this next year, It's like, I think it's hard to be 23 and lead like 35-year-old men. Like, that's hard. The big thing for me is like, I just want to see the accuracy be better. Like, like I don't need him to complete 67% of his passes. Like, that would be an insane jump. But can you like get to around 60%? And can it just look a little bit better than what it did? I'm with you in that respect. Last thing for you, Destin, and I will let you go. Everyone wants the Colts to draft Tyler Warren at 14. I don't think he's going to be available. I don't expect for the Colts to trade up. So if Tyler Warren's off the board, who do you want for them to draft at 14?
If Tyler Warren is off the board at 14, I think that's when you start to question some of these defenders in this class. I have a 2-round mock draft league-wide that comes out later today, and I'll give you the spoiler before anybody else. I have the Colts taking Jihad Campbell, linebacker out of Alabama. One of those reasons Tyler Warren was off the board already. And I think Campbell's ability and his dynamic skill set at linebacker allows him to do enough things to warrant taking a linebacker that high. I also think it would depend on some of these secondary guys. Is Malachi Starks on the board still? Is Will Johnson on the board still? Those are some guys that have a lot of pedigree from their college play that could make a lot of sense for the Colts, depending on what holes they fill in free agency. I think the best answer, though, would be if your top options are off the board at 14, you find a way to trade back in a class where there's not a lot of premium talent. So if you can get some more day 2 picks, for example, and then have a later first-round pick, and maybe you use that first-round pick on a Colston level and still address tight end, but are able to have a little bit more shots on day 2, that might be the best philosophy they could take.
Chris Ballard just smiled ear to ear when you said trade down and get more picks. That's his favorite thing to do.
Hey, I'm glad I can make his day. But I mean, I think this class might just line up with what Ballard has liked to do in the past in terms of trading back for sure. And I know some fans will not be a fan for that. But in a class where the more and more teams I talk to, I've heard multiple teams that have a single-digit amount of first-round picks in this class. The most I've heard a team say they have in this class is 12. So if you're at 14 and you just do not think a player is worth that high of a pick, and maybe there's some offensive linemen that fall, maybe there's one of those quarterbacks that fall, and you have a team desperate enough to move up, it may just be in their best interest to take a seat, move back a little bit, and just have more shots in the draft to add talent.
So we've talked quite a bit about quarterback competition. Any chance that they take, like a Jackson Dart or a Quinn Ewers in like the 2nd or 3rd round?
I mean, is it possible? Sure. I guess we'll see what free agency does and how many holes they're able to fill. Because to me, taking a quarterback in the 2nd and 3rd round, the success rate on those hits are so low that you have to – there's 2 things that really have to be standing out. One, you have to be sure on what you think this kid's talent level is to risk that success rate being so low. And 2, like it almost feels like a luxury selection. Like to me, when you're taking a quarterback in the 2nd and 3rd round, you would prefer to be able to just see how the kid develops and goes, and you have a starter in place and you have a situation in place to where you feel like you can make that style of luxury pick. I mean, for example, you go all the way back to the Jalen Hurts year, which I'm assuming a lot of people are thinking like, well, there's a quarterback drafted on day 2 that works out well. Obviously won the Super Bowl this past year. When they draft Jalen Hurts, the Eagles had been a multi-year playoff team coming off, obviously just a couple of years off of winning the Super Bowl. I think it's a very different situation than where the Colts are heading into 2025 in terms of can we be the team that has the luxury of taking a day 2 quarterback unless we believe that's going to be our franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Like, and you're exactly right. Like those Eagles in 2020, like you said, like they'd made the playoffs multiple times. Like they had a really good roster in place. The Colts, it's really interesting. Like I find it interesting that Like when like different media talking heads, like the national people, whenever they talk about the Colts, like they act like this roster is great. And then I feel like the local people are like, I don't know. I don't think it's very good. Why do you think that happens?
Yeah, I think you watch the flow chart and stocks ups and stock downs for so many different players. And I think when you look at the Colts roster, while there are some very talented players, and I mean, you could make the argument that they have Pro Bowl / All Pro caliber players on defense, for example, at all three levels, with Forrest Buckner being that type of player, with Kenny Moore being that type of player. And whether fans have been a big fan of his or not this past year, last year was Zaire Franklin's best season as a pro. And I think those things sound really good on paper until you start to look at how they actually gel together in terms of the entire roster and the depth that this Colts roster just no longer has. I mean, if you just think in your head, name a position where the Colts are deep right now, I mean, receiver would probably come up. But after that, like, is there a position on this roster you feel excellent about the depth they have? I mean, going into last year, it was edge rusher. Dio's probably walking out the door. Samson Ibukum is coming off a torn Achilles and is going to be 30 years old. And then after that, Tyquan Lewis is your depth. It's not a situation to where you look at this roster and you really feel very well set up just about anywhere in terms of depth, which is why I think a lot of the local beat reporters, when they are looking at this and studying this roster, me personally at least, I come away thinking like there's a lot that still needs to happen for them to say we are close to where we want to be.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. This roster, not very good. Destin Adams of A to Z Sports, he's got a mock draft coming out later today over at A to Z Sports.com. I'm assuming, right?
Yes, it'll be out from A to Z Sports.com. It'll be out this afternoon. Most likely around noon is when you'll see me posting it on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it these days.
Yep, and you can check him out on X or Twitter at the Destin Adams. Destin, thanks for your time, man. I said one more question and then I asked you like four more. So sorry about that, but I appreciate your time, man.
Hey, no problem. Like I said, we still have a week till the quiet time is over. So I will answer any question you have. Don't worry.
Appreciate you, man. All right, I will talk to you later. That is Destin Adams. Once again, you can check out his mock draft today over at A2ZSports.com. Should come out at around noon. You can check him out on X or Twitter at the Destin Adams. When we come back here in about 3.5 minutes or so, Indiana bubble watch, because every team except for Purdue is just the Indianapolis Colts. We have to pay attention not only to Indiana, but also to everybody else, because what everybody else does matters. A quick little breakdown of the bubble coming your way here in about 3.5 minutes.
fits in today's sports world. It's here. The real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
Ooh, what's going on? The real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Oh, man, hope you guys are having a nice week. Big thanks to Destin Adams for joining the show and talking a little bit of Indianapolis Colts. What are they going to do this offseason? Free agency, what does that look like? The draft, what does that look like? All that good stuff. He threw out the Colts drafting a linebacker, which, so make it 7 or 6, I guess. 7 mock drafts, 6 different positions for the Indianapolis Colts to draft. Once again, it just speaks to how not good this roster is, or how old this roster is, because the roster is really old as well. I don't have time to do all my bubble breakdown stuff, okay, for IU, so we're actually going to do that at 11, coming up here in about 8 minutes. We'll just keep talking Colts, because let's be honest, that's what you want to talk about anyway, okay? The Colts are always a hit around here, okay? So the Colts, the roster's just bad. It is, and I think it's actually a really interesting thing to kind of think about is, and we're laying the groundwork for quarterback defense attorney right now. In fact, let's just do it really quickly. Okay. This is quarterback defense attorney, why things are set up for Anthony Richardson to fail this next season. This roster is just not very good. Seriously, 3 offensive linemen could leave the Colts this year. Okay. And look, let's just be honest. There's not a lot of great offensive linemen available in free agency. If Anthony Richardson comes back and this offensive line is broken, then how can we really know if he's good or not? I'm just kidding. Seriously though, what is this Colts roster going to look like? They've got 18 guys that are unrestricted free agents. They'll obviously re-sign some of them, but not all of them. And what does this roster look like? I'm legitimately asking. Okay, even though it won't be able to be used as an excuse this next season because it'll be year 3 for Anthony Richardson. What if the Colts come back and the offensive line is bad? Because I'm just kind of waiting on Quentin Nelson to kind of hit that wall of I'm almost 30 years old. That's usually when we see offensive linemen, especially guards who have to move around a lot, kind of start to deteriorate. How do they evaluate Anthony Richardson if the offensive line's bad? Adonai Mitchell didn't really get any better. It's just a question, okay? I am fully on board of it's year 3. Let's figure it out, because if you don't figure it out by year 3, then chances are you're not going to figure it out at all. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing to monitor. How do the Colts spend their money this offseason? Who do they spend it on in free agency? The cap went up by $22 million freaking dollars. That's a lot of money. And so, they're going to have money to play with. They're going to have money to throw at different players. The question is, who actually wants to come here? Which my answer would be absolutely nobody. And who can the Colts get here? Who are they willing to pay and probably overpay for? Because when you're not very good, like the Colts, guys don't want to come play for you. The Bears, they can pay market value for whoever because they're in Chicago and they have a legitimate future that they can sell people. The Colts do not have that. Okay. So they're going to have to overpay for people. The Panthers, we saw them do this last year. Okay. They paid, I believe his name's Solomon Hill. He's an offensive guard. They overpaid 1.5 times the amount that he was going to go for. That's how much they had to overpay to get him to come play for the Carolina Panthers. I think we're going to have to see the Colts do the exact same thing just because this franchise doesn't have any sense of direction. Okay. Because you can't point to Anthony Richardson, to these guys in free agency and be like, do you want to come play with this guy for 1 year? Maybe. You can't do that. That's just not a selling point. So I think we're going to see the Colts have to overpay for guys. And, and then people will get really upset about that as well. It's going to be great. I can't wait for NFL free agency to kick off this next week because, it's just going to be a ton of drama. And it's going to be great. And we're going to cover it all right here on the real Jonathan Smith Show, just like how we cover Indiana and Purdue basketball. Indiana, they are on the bubble. My thoughts on Bubble Watch when we come back here in about 3 minutes.
AutoZone.
Yeah, happy to be here. Can I get some rotors?
Would you like brake pads with that?
How much are the brake pads?
Free with the rotors.
Free. Really?
Really, free.
Okay, I also need some oil.
Would you like an oil filter with that?
Yeah, how much is that?
Free with 5 quarts of oil.
Free? Really?
Really, free. It's part of the A to Z savings event.
You might as well call it A to free.
At AutoZone.
Get in the zone, AutoZone.
Restrictions apply.
After you use Bounce Dryer sheets and realize how fresh, soft, less wrinkled, and less staticky your laundry can be, you'll want a sheet on your every time. Like those socks that smell like they've been through a marathon. Or that blanket that's got wrinkles on its wrinkles. Maybe even your chatty coworker who keeps distracting you. Okay, Bounce Dryer sheets can't do it all. But for fresher, softer, better laundry, put a sheet on it with Bounce.
Let's do this. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
What's going on? Welcome back to the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you're having a nice week. Talked a lot of Colts. That's all we talked about in the first hour. So let's get into a little bit of Indiana basketball. Thanks for tuning in, by the way, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's YouTube, Indy Sports Ticket. If you want to head over there to be part of the conversation, maybe you're watching on Twitter, or maybe you're listening via that Indy Sports Ticket app, which you can download wherever you get your apps. Indiana, in their NCAA tournament chances, I think they're in, especially if they win on Saturday. It's where I'm at right now. Because when you compare their resume to everyone else, I just don't know how these other teams, given what their schedules are, how they surpass where Indiana is. Okay, so Indiana currently is in the last 4 byes section. Okay, so they wouldn't play in Dayton. They'd be like, an 11 or a 12 seed. And I feel pretty good about them beating Ohio State at home on Saturday, by the way. It's a home. It's senior night. Those things matter. I like them. Sadly, though, this is the Colts season all over again. It doesn't only matter what Indiana does. It also matters what everyone else does. And the good news for Indiana is they don't have any bad losses, which is good. But the issue, they don't have a ton of great wins either. They have 2. Best win at Michigan State. Their other impressive win was Purdue at home. Okay? But what about these other teams? Who are the other teams on the bubble? How are they looking to get in? All of those things. So Baylor, they are like the closest team to like not being last 4 in. Like they're close to being like a 10 seed or a 9 seed. So Baylor, they close with Houston. They win that game. Like they're in, no doubt about it. Like to have that win, plus a win over St. John's would be huge for them. But they do have a couple bad losses. They lost to Colorado. They lost to TCU, and they lost to Cincinnati. Okay, but their record in these quad 1 and quad 2 games, not great. 5-10 in quad 1, 2-3 in quad 2 games. Like that's not great, but if you have a win over St. John's and Houston and you play in the Big 12, then you're probably going to get in. San Diego State, another one of the last 4 teams in, or one of the 4 teams that, one of the last 4 byes, San Diego State. Okay. They're pretty average, pretty similar to Indiana. Okay, like they've got one great win over Houston. They've got some bad losses, though. They lost to UNLV twice. They closed with Nevada at home. They should win that game. If they lose, that's great for Indiana. San Diego State currently sitting at 4-5 in quad 1 games and 4-4 in quad 2 games. And then Georgia, this is the last team that gets a bye as of right now. They're closing with Vanderbilt at home, so another chance for a good win. But they've already got a couple, right? Like they beat St. John's, they beat Kentucky. They beat Florida. Like those are 3 really good wins. They don't have any bad losses. Okay. If they beat Vanderbilt, that's another pretty solid win. The issue with Georgia and why they're not higher up, they're 4-11 in quad one games, 4-0 in quad two. Like I said, they are very similar to Indiana. A few good wins, no bad losses. Okay, and those are the three teams, according to Joe Lunardi, that are ahead of Indiana. Okay, and now we're going to move to teams slightly below Indiana. These are the four teams that if the tournament started today, Joe Lunardi has them playing in Dayton, trying to play into the field of 64. So he's got Ohio State, who obviously closes their season at Indiana. That's clearly a big game for both teams. Indiana, gotta have it. Okay, that game's at 3:45 on Saturday in Bloomington. Be there, be loud, do all those great things. When you look at the Ohio State schedule, they've got good wins at Purdue and over Maryland. They, like Indiana, don't have any awful losses, but they've got some questionable ones. Okay, that's part of why this game on Saturday is such a big deal. Ohio State would probably jump Indiana in terms of seeding if they won this game. Ohio State's 5-9 in quad one games. They're 4-4 in quad two games. So while they don't have any damning losses, they've got some ones where it's they're 4-4 in quad two games. For reference, Indiana is undefeated in quad two, quad three, and quad four games. All of their losses have been quad one losses. As I said earlier, Indiana has just done the bare minimum of just you know what, we're going to do just enough to get in. That's kind of where they're at right now. Arkansas, another team that was projected to play in Dayton. Arkansas, they're closing with Mississippi State. They've got some good wins. They beat Michigan, Kentucky, Missouri, Vanderbilt. No bad losses. Okay, if they beat Mississippi State, would that be enough to vault them in front of Indiana? I don't know. Maybe. Okay, as of right now, Arkansas 4-9 in quad one games and 2-3 in quad two games. Nebraska, another Big Ten team sitting on the bubble. They're reeling a bit. They've lost 4 in a row. They had to play Iowa to close their season, so they could get back on track there, even though they lost to Iowa earlier in the season. They don't have any great wins. They beat Creighton. They beat Illinois. They beat Oregon. Those are probably their 3 best wins on the season. As I said, they already lost to Iowa. They lost to Penn State. So it's just Nebraska's a really interesting case. They're 5-9 in quad one games, 4-1 in quad two games. They don't really have any signature wins like Indiana does. Those 2 big wins over Michigan State and Purdue are huge, especially when you compare them to the rest of these teams that are sitting on the bubble. Those are maybe outside of Arkansas, the 2 best win and Georgia. They probably have those 2 wins are doing quite a bit for them in terms of how this bubble is stacking up. And then Boise State. This is the last team in, and this is why I would be surprised if Indiana missed the tournament. When you go through the Boise State resume, you have to ask yourself, how is this team even in the tournament? I don't know. Their best win is against New Mexico or Utah State. 2 good teams. But that's not crazy impressive, because they've also lost to teams like San Francisco, Boston College, Washington State, who's currently 6th in the WCC, the West Coast Conference, or whatever it's called. Okay, Boise State is 3-5 in quad one games. That's not very good. And then they're 4-1 in quad two games. That's not very great either. When I look at the Boise State resume, it's I feel like if Indiana loses their next 2 games, they would still have a better resume than Boise State. It is, because they're probably going to play Oregon again at a neutral site. That'll be a quad one game. Ohio State at home, that's probably quad two if I had to guess. And if they lost that game, that'd be their first quad two loss of the season. I don't know how Boise State, just given what the rest of their schedule is, leapfrogs over a team like Indiana. And then when you look at the first 4 teams out, don't even worry about them. Okay. The Indiana resume is way better than Boise State or whoever. So I would be very surprised if we didn't, at a minimum, get an Indiana first 4 game in Dayton, which would honestly be awesome, because we would all make you and I, we'd both make the trip. We'd drive to Dayton. We'd have a blast. It's 2 hours away. And, we'd probably watch Indiana beat whoever they played. Well, maybe. If it's close, then they would probably lose, but who knows, right? So I feel like at a minimum, just looking at the resumes of the other teams on the bubble, we are going to get Indiana at least in that first four. We'll see. Okay? And then the other teams that are kind of hovering around the bubble, teams that are below Boise State, I got to be honest. If your resume is worse than Boise State's, like, I don't even want to talk about you. But I will, just to give you a little bit more context. Some of the other teams kind of hovering around the bubble. North Carolina and Xavier both have one quad one win on the year. That's it. Oklahoma's 5-10, I guess 6-10 because they beat Missouri last night in quad one games. Like, that's not great. It's about where Indiana's at. Texas, they're 4-9 in quad one games. Not much better. Okay, once again, for the Indiana people, they're 4-11 in quad one games. But once again, no bad losses. Undefeated in quad 2, quad 3, and quad 4 games. Okay, all of those other teams are not undefeated in the other 3 quads. Okay, Indiana's lack of bad losses is what's keeping them in this. Plus, those 2 wins over Michigan State and Purdue. Okay, I think that they're going to get in. Now, obviously, like, you're going to have some bid stealers. Like, maybe Duke, Louisville, or Clemson doesn't win the ACC. Bid stolen. Okay, maybe Iowa goes on a run and they win the Big Ten. Okay, I do think that Indiana needs to be cautious of bid stealers, but in terms of the teams that are going to get at-large bids, I do think that Indiana's fine. Okay, so beat Ohio State. I think they're in just because these other teams that Indiana has needed to lose, they have all lost, which is obviously a very important thing for them. Staying in the world of basketball, the Indiana Pacers have a very important stretch that starts tonight. This is their most important stretch of the season, I would argue. So the Pacers are about to play 6 games in 10 days. And they're all huge. And only one of them is at home. And this stretch of 6 games is probably going to define whether or not they're the 4 seed and whether or not they have home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs, probably against the Milwaukee Bucks. Even though the Pistons have been playing pretty well here as of late, Cade Cunningham, about time, man. Like that dude was always really good. He was just stuck with Monty Williams as his head coach. Okay. So anyway, Pacers, big stretch starting tonight. They're in Atlanta. They're on the road playing against the Hawks. And then they rematch the Hawks on Saturday on the road in Atlanta. They should win both. A lot of the important players for Atlanta are out. Jalen Johnson, he got hurt for the rest of the year. They traded away DeAndre Hunter, familiar face, Karis LeVert. He's going to be playing. Pacers are better than Atlanta. The issue is they'll probably split because when NBA teams play each other in back-to-back games like this, it usually results in a split. Okay, because these guys do have a little bit of pride, despite what you hear on TV. Okay, like these guys want to win. They definitely don't want to lose to the same team twice in 3 days. Okay, Indiana should win both, but they'll probably split because when NBA teams play each other in back-to-backs, then that's just kind of the way that it goes. And then Monday, they're on the road playing at the Chicago Bulls. They should win that game. Okay, the Bulls have nothing good going for them right now. Kobe White, pretty good player. But, aside from that, unless you're a big Montes Buzelis fan, which I am, hello, then they just don't have much going for them. Like the Pacers are better than the Bulls, promise. Okay, then on Tuesday, biggest game of the year, they play the Milwaukee Bucks at home on TNT. National television, major implications on who's going to be the 4 seed. With where the standings sit at today, the Pacers and Bucks are tied for 4th based off of the loss column. The Bucks are half a game ahead because they've played one more game, and they won that game. Okay? So that game is big. Both teams are going to know that. The issue is the Pacers, that is the second game of a back-to-back. They play the Bulls on the road Monday, and then they host the Bucks at home on Tuesday. That's brutal. Because once again, that game's important. That game could dictate who gets the 4 seed. Okay, that game should be awesome. Giannis and Dame are both healthy. They should both be playing at full tilt. And so should everyone for the Pacers. They need to blow the Bulls out Monday night, rest the starters that way that they're good to go for Tuesday against the Bucs. Then on Friday, they go on the road again to Philadelphia. And then not this Saturday, but next, they go on the road to Milwaukee. Once again, they get Milwaukee on the second game of a back-to-back during this stretch that is incredibly important for them in terms of them making the playoffs and, succeeding and doing and, having home court in the first round and doing all those very important things. The teams in this stretch aren't really all that daunting. Like the Pacers are better than the Hawks. They're better than the Bulls. The issue is all three of those games are on the road. They play the Hawks twice in 3 days. Like that's not easy. Okay, like the Bucks, I don't think are great. I wasn't a big fan of the Kyle Kuzma acquisition, which means he's probably going to drop 40 both times when they play the Pacers. And I'm going to have to listen to people be like, I thought you said Kyle Kuzma was bad. Like, well, I don't know. Have you watched Kyle Kuzma outside of those 2 games this year? Probably not. But hey, that's fine. Anyway, so they'll, but either way, I do like the Pacers roster better than the Bucks. The issue is the Bucks have Giannis and the Pacers don't. So, it'll be a real team effort thing there. Can they slow him down? How does, Aaron Nesmith and Jarris Walker and Nembhard and Miles Turner, how do they kind of deal with him? It'll be interesting. And then, they play they also play the 76ers in this stretch, who they should beat because they're just not very good. And then, of course, every time that they play the Bucks, it's on the second game of a back-to-back. It is just a tough stretch for the Pacers from a travel standpoint. The games that really matter are, the second games of a back-to-back, and that's problematic. And they're going to play a lot of important games in a pretty short amount of time. Once again, 6 games in 10 days, right? This feels like a stretch where the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Oklahoma City Thunder and the New York Knicks, the better teams in the NBA, the Denver Nuggets, the Lakers, it feels like a stretch where they would go 5-1. Seriously, if it was Boston playing this stretch, they would go 5-1 and they'd split with the Bucks. That's the best case scenario, I think, for the Pacers going into this. If they can go 5-1 in the next 10 days, then I think that'd be great. Especially, if they split with the Hawks and they swept the Bucks. That would be amazing. I don't think that that's going to happen. I think 4-2, 3-3 is much more realistic just because of just the travel aspect of this and the fact that, 4 of these games are back-to-backs, which is a really tough thing, I think, for them to manage. So big stretch starts tonight. Indiana needs to win this game. Needs to happen. Will they win it? Probably not. But man, do I really hope that they do. Speaking of hope, I'm trying to have hope in the Indianapolis Colts. Things are just not very great for them right now. This roster isn't very good. They've got a lot of issues. The draft isn't going to solve it all. They've got 18 free agents, going into free agency, which starts this next week. It's problematic. It's just, it really is. And, we'll see what Chris Ballard does. He's going to have to make moves in free agency because they're losing so many guys. We'll see how he does. My thoughts on the Colts draft, this offseason, and what Chris Ballard needs to do to actually get me on board with everything that he's got going on right now. All that coming your way here in about 4 minutes.
It may, one day, be a must-listen for sports enthusiasts.
Yeah, and monkeys might fly out of my butt.
Uh-oh. The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Tickets. Thanks for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether it's YouTube, Twitter, the Indy Sports Ticket app, however you're listening. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. I love it when, like, oh, jeez. All right, I'm going to get a little sidetracked here. So I saw this report this morning that LaMelo Ball wants to be traded to a, quote, winning situation. And I just make this really clear about LaMelo Ball. Wherever he goes, it will immediately become a losing situation because guys that shoot 40% from the floor and then the highest field goal attempts per 100 possessions since Kobe freaking Bryant don't win basketball games. It just doesn't happen. Okay. And so, yeah, sorry. This guy responded to me on Twitter where I said that. And it's just like, all right, guys. Anyway, Colts, let's not talk about the Hornets because who wants to talk about the Hornets? The answer is nobody. The Colts, though, everyone's talking about the Colts, quarterback competition, Tyler Warren, all that kind of stuff. Okay, the Colts, they're not getting Tyler Warren. Every mock draft I've checked has him going top 10. Colts obviously sitting at 14. Are the Colts going to trade up? Absolutely not, as we all know. Okay, so what are the Colts going to do with the 14th pick? And I've come to the fascinating conclusion that no one knows. When I read mock drafts, as I do to get ready for shows, there's usually a consistent name that pops up. And if there's not a consistent name, then there's a consistent position that tends to pop up. Okay? And that just hasn't happened for the Colts. Now, that happened early. Everyone thought, the Colts would get Tyler Warren with the 14th pick. Then everyone realized that this guy is a stud, and now he's not going to last till 14. He's probably going to be top 10. Saw several mocks with him, like going to the Saints, a couple with him going to the Jets. Okay, so he's not going to be there at 14, and as we all know, Chris Ballard not trading up to grab that guy. Okay, so he's not going to be there. The Colts are going to have to take someone else. So I've looked at 6 different mock drafts. We had Destin Adams on earlier, who talked a little bit about his, which is coming out today at, here in probably about 30 minutes or so. So 7 different mock drafts. Here are the names that have been thrown out. Destin Adams threw out, I think his name's like Jahad Campbell, linebacker from Alabama. Okay. Tested really well at the combine. And as we all know, Colts need help at linebacker. Also saw tight end Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Safety Malachi Starks out of Georgia. Safety Nick Emenwari out of South Carolina. Offensive tackle Armand Membau out of Missouri. Offensive guard, I know we love our offensive guards here in the great city of Indianapolis. Tyler Booker out of Alabama. Even though I will say, like, if Chris Ballard wanted to take an offensive guard at 14, that wouldn't bother me really all that much. And then cornerback out of Texas, Jahdae Barron, won the Thorpe Award this last year. Okay. And so I read all this. It's like, oh, no one has any clue who the Colts are taking. And they don't know because this roster just isn't very good. They need a ton of help at so many different positions. Corner, offensive line, both at tackle and guard, tight end, safety, corner, linebacker. Like, they need help everywhere. Okay? Like, I just 7 mock drafts, 6 different positions, 7 different players. Crazy how bad this roster is. Like, this Colts roster needs a ton of help. And that's why no one knows who they're going to take with the 14th pick. They've got so many holes, and they're going to have 18 unrestricted free agents starting next week when free agency actually begins. Okay, here are some of the names that are going to be free agents. They'll retain some of these guys, but not all of them. Will Fries, they're going to try really hard to bring him back. He was good before he got hurt. Ryan Kelly, I would like for them to bring him back. Okay, he doesn't have to be your starting center. Let Tanner Bortolini be your starter. But Like Ryan Kelly was the guy who talked to Anthony Richardson after he tapped out. Okay? Like that is what Ryan Kelly did. And the Colts need a leader in that locker room. Okay? They need a guy who can go and talk to Anthony when he does stupid things like that. And Ryan Kelly, a guy who's been in the league for over a decade now, can be that guy. Sign him to, a veteran minimum, bring him back, and let's see what's going on. Okay, Sam Ehlinger, I know all you Sam Ehlinger hopefuls out there really want him to be re-signed. Will they? I don't know. They probably will because he and Anthony Richardson are good buddies, even though maybe it'll be good for Anthony Richardson if they don't bring back one of his buddies. I don't know. Joe Flacco, he's a free agent. No one will probably sign him until in the middle of the year. Trey Sermon, don't see them bringing him back. Ashton Doolin, good gunner on punts. Maybe they bring him back. Mo Alley Cox, please no. Please do not bring Mo Alley Cox back. Kylan Granson, probably don't bring him back. He's a receiving tight end who probably couldn't block me. Don't really need him. Danny Pinter, probably not going to bring him back. Taven Bryan, we'll see. Daiwa Dangbo, he's an interesting guy. Because I get it. His production has been really underwhelming, but he hasn't played a ton. His rookie year, he didn't start any games, only played 27% of the Colts snaps that year. His second year, 2022, played less than half of the Colts defensive plays that year. 2023, he barely played half of the available snaps on the defensive side of the football. And then this year, he played 64% of the snaps on the defensive side of the football. It's not like this dude is playing 1,000 snaps a year, something he hasn't done once, like some of the league leaders in sacks, guys like Trey Hendrickson, in Cincinnati, and Nick Bosa and those guys. He doesn't play a ton. That's why his numbers aren't great. Okay. But at the same time, the guy's 25, and NFL teams like young guys, especially edge rushers. So he's probably going to go for $20 million a year. That's what I'm expecting, somewhere between $16 and $20 million a year for Daiwa Dangbo. Maybe that means that the Colts can't afford to bring him back. We'll see kind of what ends up happening with him. But he's a guy that if the Colts brought him back, I wouldn't be super upset by, because if they let him go, I'm telling you right now, they're going to draft another pass rusher, potentially with the 14th pick. So, up to you on what you want them to do there. EJ Speed, probably not going to bring him back. Grant Stewart, don't bring him back for special teams. And Julian Blackmon, please no. Please not another year of Julian Blackmon. Okay? So they may bring 4-ish of these players back. But the reason why I bring all this up, I would like to prepare you for something. Chris Ballard is going to sign free agents this offseason. Okay? That is going to happen. And when it does, it's going to happen. We're going to see these stories of people saying things like Chris Ballard's changed. He's utilizing free agency. He's learned from his mistakes. Chris Ballard, he's learned. He's going to free agency. It's now a priority within the Colts organization. And that's just simply not going to be true. Chris Ballard is going to use free agency this year simply out of necessity. He's going to lose 12, 13, or 14 guys from his roster last year at a minimum. He has to replace them somewhere. He has to replace them with someone. Now, maybe I'm giving Chris Ballard a little bit too much credit. Okay, but I don't think he's going to dip into the practice squad. I don't think he's going to load up on undrafted free agents to fill out the rest of the roster. Okay, whether he was on the hot seat or not coming into this offseason, he was going to have to dip into free agency simply because they don't have 18 draft picks this year, which I'm sure he would much rather have than go into free agency. They have 7. So there's 11 more spots that at most that they have to fill, depending on who they bring back and who they don't. So the bar for me in terms of Chris Ballard in the offseason and whether or not it's successful is not dependent upon, who he, how many free agents it brings in. It depends on who they are. Bring in starting caliber free agents. That is what I would like to see. Like, I'm not going to be moved by him signing guys on the same level as Raekwon Davis, the big defensive tackle that they brought in from the Miami Dolphins last year. Okay, like that's not going to move me. Like that's a backup. Like, I'm not going to be moved by you bringing in these different backups. And we've been sold this idea that they're going to have a legitimate quarterback competition coming up in this year's minicamp. Okay, shout out to DeForest Buckner for making this happen. Okay, right, and we've heard Chris Ballard talk about the open competition and how it's got to be like a real one. And Chris Ballard made a whole big fuss, not even just about a quarterback competition, but competition across the roster. The Colts need more competition in the building, according to Chris Ballard, but not really according to Chris Ballard. It's really more according to DeForest Buckner, because Chris Ballard didn't bring it up until DeForest Buckner said something about needing more competition. So once again, thank you, DeForest Buckner. And I think it's pretty well established that the Colts are going to define quarterback competition as Daniel Jones, a guy who's not really competition for Anthony Richardson. I think we all know that. And I think they're going to do that at every single position. I would define Daniel Jones as like a high-end backup. And that's what I think we're going to see brought in for the Indianapolis Colts. And they're going to label it as competition. Okay, they're going to bring these low-end starters, high-level backups, and be like, yeah, here's your competition, guys. Go be better. That is what I am expecting. And we're going to look up. The NFL season is going to start, and it's going to be the majority of the same guys taking snaps and making plays as we saw last year. Okay, the Colts are not using free agency to bring in starters. They're using it to bring in these like high-level backups, and hopefully the Colts draft well this year, because that's the only way that this team's going to improve. Like that is where the improvements will be made. It's not going to be made in free agency. Okay, like forget everything Chris Ballard has said about it. They're bringing in high-level backups. Like, I don't care how much Chris Ballard wants to bring up and discuss and talk about, competition. Like, it's not going to happen. Okay. I refuse to believe it. And I think this is where a lot of people are with Chris Ballard. It's like, you can say as much as you would like to, but until you actually like do something, then good luck. Okay. Now, if Chris Ballard wants serious competition, if he wants to, create something like legitimate competition at a position of need where the Colts are going to need help, like, go get Joey Bosa. Like, forget bringing Dio back. Go get Joey Bosa, 29-year-old, a guy who's been a Pro Bowler. Numbers not as good as they used to be. We've kind of seen a bit, of a dip in his production since, a couple years ago. That's part of why, the Chargers let him go. He was really expensive, but, go get him, bring him in, because he's going to push guys like DeForest Buckner and Leatu Latu and, Abukum, who's coming off that Achilles, and the rest of these edge rushers that the Colts have. Like, go get a guy like that. Like, if you want me to believe you, Chris Ballard, go get a guy who legitimately can play. Like, go get a guy who is like legitimate, serious, like could start for a lot of teams in the NFL. Go get a guy like Joey Bosa. Doesn't have to be him, but go get someone that is actually going to show up and be able to contribute. That is really what I want to see. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, I've seen this topic floated around a little bit, and I think it's really absurd. No way around it. Travis Hunter had a pretty interesting quote at the NFL Draft Combine, and I agree with him. A lot of people don't, and I don't get it. I'm going to tell you what that quote is when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
The best takes. Maybe. The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
What's going on? Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Tickets. Hopefully you guys are having a nice day. I know I am, just pissing off Hornet fans telling him LaMelo Ball's no good, because he is no good. Okay? The guy's terrible. Not a winning player. Anyway, it's fun because the LaMelo Ball army that exists is just, a bunch of like 12-year-olds. And my boy Zach Gray, who I think is going to come on tomorrow, and hopefully, he'll give out some more winning bets. He's been on a bit of a heater right now, and he, but he also for some reason likes LaMelo Ball. Anyway, so I saw this clip, and the reaction to it I think has actually been pretty fascinating. Travis Hunter made a comment at the NFL Combine saying that him playing both ways in the NFL is tougher than Shohei Ohtani playing both ways in Major League Baseball. I agree with him. No one else does, apparently. It is absolutely Travis Hunter. There's no doubt about it in my mind. Just think about the physical exertion that it takes. That is way harder. The conditioning, it's much more physical. Getting hits or delivering a hit 120 times a game, which is probably a bit much because he plays receiver and corner, but having to play 120 snaps a game is much tougher than throwing 80 pitches and swinging a bat 5 times. Okay? Like there were, we have never seen an NFL player do what Travis Hunter is potentially about to do. And we saw guys way back in the day, Babe Ruth, do both. Okay, and I get it. Shohei Ohtani is amazing. If you wanted to tell me Shohei Ohtani is a better baseball player or a better two-way player than Travis Hunter, wouldn't argue with you. Couldn't argue with you because we haven't seen Travis Hunter do it yet. But just the conditioning and the physicality and the requirements to be able to play both sides of the ball in the NFL, also from a mental standpoint, not only understanding the offensive playbook, but also your defensive playbook. It's much more than throwing 80 pitches and then swinging a bat 5 times, because that's really what it is. Okay? And there are plenty of guys, I think there are plenty of guys in Major League Baseball who are talented enough to both pitch and hit. Okay? If they wanted to take Manny Machado, teach him how to throw a slider and a changeup, along with his, probably 98 mile an hour fastball, he could hit and pitch. There are plenty of guys talented enough to do it. They just don't, because it was frowned upon for so long. And Shohei Ohtani has showed up and kind of changed everything. And I think we're going to start seeing more players actually be able to and be allowed to do both. Whereas the NFL, I don't think that we're going to see that, because there just aren't enough football players in the world good enough to play both corner and wide receiver. Okay, so yeah, what Travis Hunter is about to do in the NFL, much, much tougher than what Shohei Ohtani has been doing in Major League Baseball. Indiana making the tournament. I think it's going to happen. I was going through, some bubble stuff last night. Who else is on the bubble? How does their resume stack up against Indiana's? I'm going through all of them, and I'm looking at all these different teams like Georgia. Probably, that's a pretty good resume. Probably a better resume than Indiana's. I don't really have a bad loss. Have wins over St. John's, Kentucky, and Florida. Pretty good. I was going through the Arkansas resume. Pretty solid. If they beat Mississippi State, Arkansas, they're probably going to get in. And then, as I'm kind of working through all these different bubble teams, I get to, the teams actually on the bubble and the last team in. Boise State's the last team in. And I don't know how. Seriously. Their best wins either New Mexico or Utah State. Those are 2 good teams, but those aren't it's not the equivalent of beating, Michigan State on the road or Purdue. So it's nowhere close. And then Boise State has losses to teams like San Francisco, Boston College, and Washington State. They're 3-5 in quad 1 games, 4-1 in quad 2 games. When you look at Indiana, 4-11 in quad 1 games, but they are undefeated in quad 2, quad 3, and quad 4 games. Okay? And then like that to me is because like just looking at these other teams, like, oh, sorry, like as I was looking at all this last night, the NCAA tournament does not need to be expanded. It doesn't. Because like when you look at these bubble teams, like North Carolina and Xavier have one quad 1 win each. That's terrible. North Carolina is like 1-14 in quad 1 games. Xavier's like 1-9. Okay, that team does not belong in the NCAA tournament. Oklahoma, 5-10. Or I guess 6-10 because they beat Missouri last night in quad 1 games. It's not great. Texas, 4-9 in quad 1 games. That's just not very good. And if they were to expand the NCAA tournament, teams like that would get in. Like that is what would wind up happening. And if that's the way that all of this is going to work, then like how do you put them in? How could you justify expanding the tournament if those are the type of teams that are going to get in? I would be in favor of the NCAA tournament expanding under one condition. Those extra slots don't go to, North Carolina, who's got one quad 1 win. Okay? Like that is, no, like don't give it to teams like that. I would be in favor of the NCAA tournament expanding if they gave that final slot to some of the best mid-major teams in the country. Like if instead of, one quad 1 win, Xavier and North Carolina got in, if like North Texas, who's 13-3 in the American Conference and 22-6 overall, like if a team like that got in, then like I would be in favor of that. If VCU and or George Mason got in an expanded NCAA tournament, I would be in favor of that. Okay, not, North Carolina, who's 4th in the ACC, with once again, one single quad 1 win got in. Like put in some of these like non-power schools, put in more of these mid-majors. Okay, like put in High Point if they don't win their conference championship because they're 26-5 and they're 14-2 in their conference, which I find to be much more impressive than North Carolina and their one single quad 1 win, or Xavier and their one single quad 1 win. Okay, that would be my caveat for them expanding the NCAA tournament. Don't put in more of these power schools. Put in more mid-majors because like the mid-majors are what make March Madness so much fun. Like the year that Florida Gulf Coast made their run to the Sweet 16 was a blast. When Loyola Chicago made their run to the Final freaking Four, that was fun. When Butler went to back-to-back Final Fours, incredible. Like those are the most enjoyable years of March Madness. It's like, let's put more of these really good mid-major teams in, especially with the way that like basketball has changed and how has the playing field leveled out. I don't know. I think Duke's always going to be Duke and UConn's always going to be UConn. But I do think that with the transfer portal, some of these mid-major schools are better. And so if they were to ever expand the NCAA tournament, I would want it to be with the caveat that they have to put in more of these mid-major teams. Okay? But if it's like, yeah, let's expand the tournament so we can put in Xavier and Villanova and North Carolina, whose resumes just simply aren't very good, then yeah, I'm not going to be a very big fan of that. And I love hoops. Okay? Big basketball guy over here, and I will continue to be for, forever. Pacers, they are set to play tonight. They're taking on the Atlanta Hawks. They start this very important 6-game stretch. They're playing 10 games in 6 games in 10 days. 10 games in 6 days would be wild. It's like AAU stuff. Anyway, 6 games in 10 days, 5 of them on the road. They got a couple back-to-backs built in there, and this is their most important stretch of the season. It is. Okay? Because, they've got 4 very winnable games and then 2 very important ones against the Milwaukee Bucks. Like if they go 5-1 in this stretch, then I think that like their chances of grabbing that 4 seed go up pretty exponentially. So tonight, obviously, they're on the road. They're playing the Hawks. Good old Atlanta. Good old Trae Young. They should win that game. The issue is 2 days from now, Saturday, they play the Hawks again. So they're probably going to split that because when NBA teams play each other, in like back-to-back games like this, teams tend to split. And then Monday, they're at Chicago. They should win that game because the Bulls are not very good. Then on Tuesday, their one home game during this 6-game stretch, they host the Milwaukee Bucks on TNT at home. And that's obviously a huge game for them with major playoff implications in terms of whether or not the Colts are going to, or Colts, in terms of whether or not the Pacers are going to be the 4 seed or the 5 seed or maybe even the 6 seed. Double D! Boom! Thank you. Boom! You're the man. Boom! Bringing in my Wendy's.
My losses.
Pacers are on, just in the middle of this very important 6-game streak. And love the energy there. That was great. And so basically they're going to play the Bucks twice in these next 6 games, both coming off, both in the second game of a back-to-back. Monday the Bulls, Tuesday they play the Bucks at home, and then next Thursday they play the 76ers on the road, and then Friday they play the Bucks on the road. And so it's just this brutal stretch of travel and being away from home and all of these important things that impact whether or not your team is ready to go or not. It does. And this feels like a stretch, or if it's like the Celtics or the Knicks or I don't know, the Cavaliers or the Thunder or the Lakers or the Nuggets or like the teams that are legitimately good enough to win the whole thing. It feels like a stretch where they go 5-1. And if the Pacers go 5-1 on this stretch, my thought process of them like pulling off an upset against Cleveland or, not New York, because I do think that the Pacers are better than New York, but or Boston or, whoever goes up. Because this is a tough stretch and good teams, the best teams in the NBA, go 5-1 in this stretch of games that are very important in terms of playoff seeding. As of right now, the Bucks and Pacers are tied in the loss column in the standings. Bucks have played one more game. They won that game, so they're up by half a game in the standings. And in these next, 10 days, I think we're going to get a pretty legitimate amount of movement in terms of, who's going to be that 4 seed, who's going to be that 5 seed, while also kind of keeping your eye on the Pistons, who are currently in that 6th spot, but they're playing really well right now. Okay, they're 8-2 in their last 10, right? They're a game and a half back of the Pacers, 3 games back in the loss column. All right, 3 games back of the Bucks as well in the loss column. So these next 10 days, I think we're going to see a pretty decent amount of movement between the Bucks, Pacers, and Pistons in terms of who's where and who's going to who and all those different types of things. It feels like the top 6 slots in the Eastern Conference are set. Like Cleveland, they clinched their playoff berth last night after beating the Heat. They're going to be the 1 seed. They're 52-10. They are the 1 seed. Boston probably going to be the 2 seed. They're up 3.5 games on the Knicks. Knicks probably going to be the 3 seed. They're up 4 games on the Bucks, 4.5 on the Pacers. So it feels like those top 3 seeds are set. There's a 5-game difference between the Pistons and the Heat in the 6 and 7 slots. And so 4, 5, 6, that is where all the movement is going to happen in the closing weeks of the NBA season. Pacers got to be sharp. It starts with these next 6 games in these next 10 days. They can go 5-1. I feel great about them going into the playoffs as the 4 seed. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to tune into the Real Jonathan Smith Show. I'll be back on again tomorrow. Zach Pirles is set to join from CBS Sports. Zach Gray, he is also set to join probably at 11:40 like normal. He'll have bets and all those good things. We'll probably also talk about LaMelo Ball, and it'll probably get heated, and it'll be fun. So the Nate Ocker Show comes your way here in about 5 minutes, getting you ready for Illinois State because they got a big one today. I'm just kidding. He'll probably talk IU, Colts, all those other good things as well. Thanks again for taking the time out of your day to listen to my show. I'll talk to you tomorrow starting at 10. The Dan Dockett Show comes your way here in about 4.5 minutes.